Some people were asking why there's so many jump cuts in these videos. It's because I literally read the magazine in between the cuts. Couple of corrections over last week's episode. First of all, Galaxy Express 39, not 999. I did not know that at all, but now I know. Future Boy Conan apparently was not a part of the World Masterpiece Theater series. It just is incredibly similar to those and comes from the same people, but it is not technically considered a part of it, according to my comments. Also, and I discovered this shortly before that video came out, but it was pointed out by some people in the comments, that the Robotech movie is not Macross Do You Remember Love. There was a Robotech movie that came out that was like some weird recut of like Megazone 2-3 and something else that was just a result of trying to, you know, keep the franchise alive when there was not proper materials for it or something. Yeah, it was just like a really weird anomaly that happened, and it was called Robotech. That's why people said that that movie was really bad, whereas they are not referring to Do You Remember Love. Question for the audience. Let me know in the comments, would you rather that I skip around anime history in these videos, like do some stuff from the 2000s, some stuff from the 90s, like back to back, or would you prefer I do it in sort of a timeline? Because I've got a lot of magazines from the 90s, as well as a ton from the early and mid 2000s. So I could skip around, or I could keep doing it in like a progression. Currently, the ones I've been reading are all from the 90s, so today's episode's going to be about a 1997 issue of Animerica. But let me know if you'd rather that I skip into the future. I can't really go much further into the past. Like, the earliest magazines I have are from the early to mid-90s. So, Animerica in the 90s was in many ways the counterbalance to Protoculture Addicts, whereas Protoculture Addicts was entirely like fan-made, like it was all just random submissions that made it into the magazine, and like it was sort of cobbled together of a bunch of different people's you know, mailed in opinions and stuff. This was the big industry magazine of the 90s. This is the one that had, you know, a consistent editing and writing staff. It was the one that had tons of endorsement deals with all kinds of different anime companies. That is heavier on advertising, of course, just for anime stuff, so the ads are kind of really relevant. But, you know, this was the big magazine of the 90s, and it would continue well into the 2000s, and essentially became Otaku USA. Like, this was edited by Trish Ledoux, and one of the writers who would come to be a part of the magazine a little bit later, after this issue, would later go on to create Otaku USA. So sort of after Animerica died, that sort of replaced it. I mean, you can tell right there in the names, I guess, that it's related, but yeah, this is sort of an institution. It's been going for a long time. I don't know exactly why Animerica died. Like, when I was a kid and I first got into magazines in the early 2000s, I was big into Anime Invasion, which later became Anime Insider, and Animerica was like a rarer magazine, so maybe it just wasn't as widely distributed. Maybe the competition from magazines like Anime Insider helped to destroy it, but I don't know. I don't know the history well enough, but like, yeah, I had only a couple issues of Animerica when I was younger. I've gotten a lot more of them in the mail, and I didn't even know that it had been around since the mid-90s until I started reading these older issues. The cover on this, I literally did not know what this show is, and it doesn't say anywhere. It just says Samurai Anime, because the first big feature in here is just an explanation of the history of samurai eras and like which shows were sort of based in those eras, just to give you background, you know, on the history that these shows are commenting on. It mostly focuses on a show called Yotoden, which I had never even heard of, and one called the Hakendan, which was an OVA series that has some pretty incredible animation in it. The first episode of the Hakendan is like a crazy-ass animation showcase, but it's also like borderline incomprehensible. I've only seen the first episode, but it's an interesting clusterfuck is how I would describe it. But yeah, this is, I think this guy's from the Hakendan, going by, like, it doesn't even, there's no explanation in the magazine of which one which one hold on, let me see if I can find it, if there's any info in here. There's pictures from Yotoden as well as the Hakendan, and I'd say the main character, the guy on the cover, looks less like this and more like this, though they are incredibly similar. Now, in spite of that being the cover story and there being a big article about it, this magazine makes much more to do about Galaxy Express 39, because a sequel manga series was starting up its run around the time and was going to be released in Animerica. This is one of the earlier anime magazines to have a manga preview section, which is sort of a staple now. I mean, I guess it's always been a staple if it was around in the 90s, but for me, when I first got into anime magazines through, again, Anime Invasion, they didn't start incorporating that until like a few years into their run. But the letters from the editor page is just a catch-up on the story of Galaxy Express 39. It seems that the author, the editor of this magazine, is a really big Leiji Matsumoto fan, not unlike the editor of Protoculture Addicts, and particularly is a big fan of this series. So they offer a full recap of the plot of the original Galaxy Express 39, just to get you ready for the sequel. And there's even more of that later into the book, of just like trying to get you caught up on this series because they're previewing the sequel manga in this magazine. Here, I'll just show you the section that they have on the sequel manga, which is formatted interestingly. There's like an article running down the sides of the page, while the middle of them is explaining who all the characters are, just giving like a brief history of them, and meanwhile the pages are explaining who Leiji Matsumoto is, the history of his manga, and of course the history of the Galaxy Express 39 manga and films. But the most interesting bit in here is about how that movie came to the US, which is that Roger Corman, the guy who directed Death Race 2000, personally brought the movie to the US, and they like extremely edited and changed names and story ideas. Apparently the characters Tetsuro and Captain Harlock were changed to Joey and Captain Warlock. It's just fucking hilarious. Now, I realize I just described Roger Corman as the director of Death Race 2000, which is all that he's mentioned for in that magazine. But Roger Corman is like one of the most storied film producers and directors of all time. He's a 91-year-old man who has had a career spanning most of that life, directing, I mean, dozens of movies, producing hundreds of movies. I can't even possibly get into all of them. Like, I can't even begin. I'm just scrolling down his list of films, and it's fucking endless. I mostly knew his name because I watch a lot of Red Letter Media, and he gets mentioned a lot of the time on their show. But yeah, the man is deeply integral to film. If you happen to know who he is, he apparently was involved in anime at one point, which is a very strange thing to realize. Incidentally, the actual manga preview in here is just, it's beautiful looking. Like, I mean, Leiji Matsumoto's artwork is pretty fucking gorgeous, and this is presented in, like, just really beautiful pages, glossy, striking. I probably should read this article about all the different periods of Japanese history, because every time I try to say like when a show takes place, I always get it wrong, and people laugh at me because I always make it out like the Sengoku era was like right before the Tokugawa era, and it is very clearly not. I mean, it is, but like each of those is like 100 years long. Like, there's a lot. The Tokugawa Edo period is from 1600 to 1868, according to this. And, you know, I like to imagine that Rurouni Kenshin took place right after Inuyasha, you know. Which, incidentally, Inuyasha is mentioned in here as Rumiko Takahashi's new manga series. I don't think there was any information about it, really, in the West at the time. Like, Inuyasha literally would have been brand new. It had definitely not aired on Adult Swim yet, so it is not really discussed in this magazine, even though Rumika Takahashi was fucking huge in the 90s. Now, a lot of what I remember from magazines of my youth, especially ones like Animerica, is that they really tried to create a sense of community with anime fans. They were always focusing on stuff like conventions and cosplay, fan art, like trying to make out this idea, like inform you that there are other people interested in the things you're interested in, like making it look like, wow, there's so many people who are into anime and we're all, you know, sharing these interests. So they've got like a whole page of cosplays, you know, you got a Gendo here, the main girl from Magic Knight Rayearth, some fighting game characters, you know, like, hey, these guys are watching the shows that I'm watching, you know, which is a great thing. And I'm sure it had a lot to do with why I was even interested in conventions as a youth. This is from Project Acon 8, which Project ACO being a very popular OVA of the late 80s, early 90s that not many people care about today because it's not good. Once again, the Harvey Hotel in Addison played host to Acon, although the ever-swelling attendance reported this year to have approached 2,000 over 3 days, has led to the talk of moving next year's event to an even larger place. Huge crowd of 2,000 people. How many were at Anime Expo this year? Like 100,000 more than that? I don't know. Okay, here's my favorite section of this magazine. It's called Special Preview, and it's just a listing of, like, upcoming shows that are going to be on VHS or whatever at the time. And each one is broken down into 3 sections. There's What You Get, which just basically explains what the hell the thing is. Star Power, which explains, like, who worked on it that you might have heard of. And then Replay Factor, which is just explaining, basically, is it good or not? This is a very interesting way of handling review recommendations where there's no the personality of the reviewer really in there. There's no score. There's no, like, indication. There's no, like, statement on, is this good or is this bad? You can kind of, by saying Replay Factor, you sort of sidestep that while still saying it. In other words, you're not going to piss off any of the sponsors, but you know, can nonetheless give recommendations. For instance, I'll read you this one for Eyes of Mars. What You Get. Obscure anime production done non-profit in early 90s, released under the original Japanese title Mother. Almost incomprehensible story of psychics, space, and all sorts of other strange stuff. Star Power, staff of unknown animators, as seen on the Sci-Fi Channel. Replay Factor, We'll need repeat viewings just to figure out what's going on. Now, the way that's phrased, you can tell they're saying this is a bad movie, but they have not said, this is a bad movie. They've said, you will need repeat viewings just to understand what's going on. They're not even not recommending it to you. Like, they're telling you you'll have to watch it more than once. You know, like, the implication is don't watch it, but the statement is watch it more than once. It's a good way to cover your ass. Now, obviously, the part of this that I find the most interesting is the Star Power, because what I really love in reading these old magazines is hearing how they describe a personnel who later goes on to have a long and illustrious career. Because a lot of the talent in the 90s is pretty new. You know, while you've got returning directors like Rintaro and you know, returning manga authors like Leiji Matsumoto who've been active since the fucking 70s, you've also got this huge wellspring of new people who are getting their start doing OVA work in the late 80s and early 90s, and a lot of those people are now major industry figures. So, like, I love hearing how they would describe you know, someone's star power when they're early in their career. For instance, 3x3 Eyes listing, they mention the great creepy music by Kaoru Wada, credited for Silent Mobius and Kishin Corpse. Kaoru Wada, I would best know, and you probably best know, as the guy who did the music for Inuyasha, and I also know him really well for Kashern Sins. He's one of my favorite composers. His 3x3i soundtrack is pretty great. Armitage the Third Polymatrix, the star power, this is just for the dub release, of course, is that it has Hollywood actors Kiefer Sutherland and Elizabeth Berkley in the voice roles. Sound and effects completely redone by Hollywood pros. Yeah, the dub is shit. Kiefer Sutherland is a terrible voice actor, but there's no mention of the fact that it's written by Chiaki J. Kanaka, because this was like his first thing. He wouldn't have been a star with power. If you were reading something about Technolize, it would almost certainly mention that Chiaki Kanaka, the writer of Serial Experiments Lain and Armitage III and Hellsing, was working on it. Biohunter talks about the involvement of Wicked City's Yoshiaki Kawajiri. I'm kind of surprised that it was Wicked City and not Ninja Scroll. I don't know if Ninja Scroll wasn't out yet in 97, because, I mean, the movie was out in Japan. I don't know if it was out in the US yet. Because Yoshiaki Kawajiri would definitely best be known for Ninja Scroll, but maybe, and I mean, Ninja Scroll is mentioned in that samurai piece. Directed by Yoshiaki Kawajiri, Ninja Scroll's plot is actually rather similar to the director's previous Wicked City, and ninja skills are exaggerated to the extent of being supernatural abilities. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know if it was out yet. The fact that they had to, like, explain part of the plot makes me think that maybe it wasn't. Okay, here's a great one. Dragon Ball Z. What you get. Monkey King Legend revamped Dragon Ball gets updated to mega superhero status with the introduction of invading aliens with superpowers, even more improbable martial arts, and extra-dimensional action in fantastic realms. Star Power. Based on the mind-blowingly successful manga creation of Akira Toriyama, now familiar to American audiences as game character designer for the likes of Tobal 2 and Chrono Trigger. Dragon Ball Z is the hyper-adrenaline fest of angst and fisticuffs that martial arts and game fans have been chomping at the bit to see for years on end. Replay factor. DBZ purists will find a lot to argue with in the US version, especially the recurring bald-faced statements that characters seen disintegrating on screen are being sent to another dimension. Still, on-screen editing is kept to a minimum and the story shines through the little white lies of the TV broadcast version. Kids, especially video game buffs, are likely to be mesmerized by the brain-numbing power levels on display here. So DBZ is pretty new. It's on TV. It's still in the period where it's being really heavily censored. I mean, it would always be censored, but, like, I don't think it continued to be that heavily. But yeah, the star power is that he did it had never occurred to me that Chrono Trigger had been out in the US before Dragon Ball. Like, because I've always thought of it as, like, oh, that game that had designs by Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball Z fame. I've never thought of it as, oh, that show from the guy who did the Chrono Trigger designs. But I bet that was probably the case for a lot of people at the time, because Chrono Trigger was a pretty beloved game in the early 90s. And today. Alright, here's something I'm even more fucking excited about. And God, I want to collect every Animerica just so I can fucking chart this. We have the Animerica Top 5 Best-Selling Anime. The best-selling anime of August 1997. Number 1, Twin Angels Volume 2. Number 2, Twin Angels Volume 1. Twin Angels is the English name given to a hentai anime series about twin sisters and a boy who will determine the fate of the world. Inju Seisen Twin Angels. Horror, erotic. Third highest selling, Urotsuki Doji 3, Return of the Overfeed video set. The top 3 are all porn. After that, shockingly, Armored Trooper Votoms Stage 3 box set and Armored Trooper Votoms Stage 1 box set. Surprised there's not, like, more mention of Armored Trooper Votoms in the magazine if it was so popular at the time. I didn't even know it was very popular at the time. But yeah, so porn and robots exclusively occupying the top 5. Oh, we've got the top 10, Japan's top 10 highest selling laser discs. Number 1 being Shinseiki GPX Cyber Formula Saga, followed by Slayer's Special 3, a Zambot 3 Memorial Box, El Hazard Volume 2, Volume 4 of You're Under Arrest, Act 5 of Saber Marionette J, Ginga Ojo-sama Densetsu Yuna, Kariyama no Fairly, Volume 3. Isn't that the, that was that, Shinbo thing, right? Galaxy Fraulein Yuna? Is that what that is? I think so. Escaflowne Vision 11. Nadesco Volume 1 at number 10. And, I'm pretty sure Nadesco would go on to sell incredibly well. There's a whole bunch of imports and stuff. Here we've got a list of shows that were going on sale that month. So we've got English VHS. 3x3 Eyes, Volumes 5 and 6 was just coming out. They're about to come out with a new Blackjack, Gaokaiser, Ranma, Blue Sea, Devil Hunter Yoko number 5. Oh boy. Oh, there's both the dub list and the sub list, so that's nice. I totally neglected to mention this at the beginning, but the reason Animerica was the bigger, more corporate magazine is that it's made by Viz. It was made by Viz Communications, the group that was like literally releasing all of the Rumiko Takahashi stuff, the ones who would later release Shonen Jump. That was how I first found out about them. They're one of the bigger anime distributors of the time, and here they've got a Viz shop by mail catalog. Buy all your Viz crap by mail. Nice of them, though, to advertise things that aren't by Viz in their magazine. So here we look, you can see that it's all Viz stuff, but then at the very bottom they've got like stuff from other companies that you can also order through them. Who wants to buy anime stuff from the 90s? You want to go buy I don't know if any of these stores are still open. It would be very interesting if any of them are. The whole article about samurai times, like the whole history of Japan thing, continues later on, and Oda Nobunaga just has a whole fucking section to himself because he's so fucking prominent in anime that of course he needed one. The cuteness battle was long and hard fought. Hello Kitty won. Alright, moving along, here's a great section for you mecha fans. This is a whole feature about Yasuhiro Imagawa and his work on Giant Robo. Because whereas Giant Robo is considered a very, very cult favorite today, in the 90s, I guess it was a kind of a big deal. People wanted to fucking know about it, especially because Giant Robo infamously took like 8 years in production. Particularly, it took like 2.5 years between episodes 6 and 7, 7 being the finale. Of course, this is what Imagawa was being asked about. Now, this is not actually like an interview conducted by the magazine, but actually just talking about what he discussed at his panel at Anime Expo 1997. Most of which is, of course, him being pestered about the Giant Robo finale. He had just finished working on it. He said that all the work on episode 7 was concluded a week before coming to this convention, and it will be released by the end of the year, is what he assures people. But here's some details I like. They asked, why did it take so long between episodes? He says, well, to be honest, it was the storyboards that took the longest, Imagawa explained. I had rewritten the script a few times as well, but the storyboards themselves were rewritten over 10 times. And after all, we've made you wait this long, so if I let down anyone, I knew that forevermore no one would watch anything that I make. And on a private matter, he continued, my father passed away during the production, and I was away from work for about half a year. So in some ways, there are certain aspects of the story that overlap with my real life. So in that sense, this has been a work that has made a great impression on me. Since the story is about father and child, it really had an impact on my personal feelings as well. Here's what Imagawa had to say about the retro look of the designs of the show. Well, I don't like popular animation, Imagawa said. The original creator of Giant Robo is Mitsuteru Yokoyama, and even in Japan there are very few animated productions that take advantage of his style. But he is a veteran manga artist, and he has created many hits, and his style is very familiar to people. I don't consider it a retro look, but this is a manga artist who has been around since the end of World War II, and he has many life experiences that he can breathe into his characters. So what I wanted to do was borrow the 50, 60 plus years of life experience from a creator who had something like that for 20-something younglings like us. So I guess he was a 20-something at the time he was doing this. I didn't really want to go for a retro look, but I wanted to have characters with a history, and that's the result you see in Giant Robo. But yes, it was an adventure, so it's a synergy of this kind of character with a long life combined with the younger, fresher styles of people like Yamashita. And that's the wonderful result of Yamashita's experience and talent. He is referring to Akihiko Yamashita, who was the character designer for Giant Robo, who was on the panel with him, along with Miho Shimogusa, who was a staffer from Cutie Honey and Sailor Moon, who had done a little bit of work on Giant Robo. There's a few pages of just like catching you up on the story of Giant Robo, showing off the characters as they stand going into the final episode. And then they conducted some more proper interviewee questions with these creators. So they decided to ask Imagawa about G Gundam, which of course was still fairly new at the time and was still sort of seen, as discussed in the previous video, as a blight on the Gundam franchise. So here's his contribution to the Gundam legacy with Mobile Fighter G Gundam. For my generation, Gundam was a show that had a big impact. It was a big influence, and it was the first time that I had a chance to carry on the torch from someone big like Yoshiyuki Tomino, so I thought that would be a good career move. I mean, for Zeta Gundam, I was only an episode director, so G Gundam was my first job as a Gundam series director. And yes, I was going to do a serious Gundam story at first, but there were various problems, and it ended up into a video game Gundam story. You cannot thank the sponsor, he laughs. On exactly why G Gundam turned out to be a video game Gundam story. For the V Gundam show prior to that, the show's toy sales had plummeted. They didn't really sell. So the request was to create a Gundam show that children would like, something that would appeal to them. That was something I could sympathize with, so especially in the later half of the show, I was really into creating it. Thanks to the good toy sales, I was able to do as more as I wished in the later half, and it was a valuable lesson to me that a peaceful coexistence between creator and sponsor is a very important thing. He then laughs. Initially, the working title for my Gundam show was going to be Pokerino Gundam. I think the main character in the Italian director guy's railroad movies was Pokerino. I do not know what he's referring to there. But that got turned over and it became G Gundam. I'd borrowed the name, and it was supposed to be a story about the main character, a boy named Pokerino, and his Gundam. It could have been the TV version of Giant Robo, but it became bigger. Actually, there is a tell-all book in Japan that tells about what really went behind the story, so if you could find that book, all the juicy stories are in there, but unfortunately it's all in Japanese. Now, I know a lot of the stuff about this is open knowledge on the internet. You know, I've heard stories of why G Gundam was the way it was before, but it's interesting to hear Imagawa's personal perspective on it. There's also a great bit from Miho Shimogasa in here talking about Sailor Moon. She says, I worked on Sailor Moon for 5 years. It was a long show. You can really get along with the staff if you work there for 5 years. I was able to make it through with the good, the bad, and the ugly of the staff. They're all eccentrics. My proudest moment with my Sailor Moon career would be the Sailor Moon movie, Ami's First Love. I did my best in that one. I love to think about the idea that the Sailor Moon staff were all eccentrics. This is a staff which would include the likes of Kunihiko Ikuhara, the guy who I'm hopefully have edited a picture of him dressed as Sailor Mars onto the screen, and who created Revolutionary Girl Utena when him and other people who worked on Sailor Moon wanted to do something more experimental with the ideas of Sailor Moon. Not surprising that they'd be a bunch of eccentrics in her eyes. On the varying styles of animation directors in a TV series, there is fierce competition among episode animation directors, and they're all intent on creating the best episode among their competition, so it's hard to keep up with them. We were all intent on making our own episodes the best ones of the bunch, but I also like forming the character faces. So, yeah. It's interesting to imagine that all these different episode directors are not, or different animation directors are not only trying to like make their own distinct art in the show, but they want theirs to be the best episodes. Dude, you can buy import and American Nintendo 64 and PlayStation and Saturn at the lowest unbeatable prices. Don't you want Turok Dinosaur? Oh, hey, we've got Japan's manga top 10. The top 10 manga. We've made it into the manga section of the magazine. The top 10 best-selling manga in Japan. Number 1, Rurouni Kenshin Volume 15. Number 2, Otanko Nurse. Number 3, Level E, which is the Yoshihiro Togashi series that's way less popular than Yu Yu Hakusho or Hunter x Hunter, but you should check it out. It's got a pretty good anime adaptation. Oh My Goddess Volume 14. I've never heard of this. GS Mikami Kyokuten Gokuraku Daisakusen, or GS Mikami Great Operation Ultimate Pleasure. We got Tenshi Kinyoku Oke no Monsho Oishinbo, which has come out in the US. That's the cooking manga. Sotsugyo M, and Bud Boy. Bud Boy. I'm about to become a Bud Boy in a minute here. Oh boy, here we go. We've got an article on Princess Mononoke having just come out in Japan. On Miyazaki's Mononoke Hime. Hayao, so it's not even called Princess Mononoke yet. Hayao Miyazaki's Mononoke Hime, or Princess Mononoke, is a hit. It's setting a Japanese film industry record and continues to do well. Long before its release, this film was anticipated as Hayao Miyazaki's first new animated feature in 2 years, so a certain amount of success was expected. But who would have thought it would be this big of a hit? Last month, I wrote here that summer in Japan is seeing an unprecedented rush of anime films. In addition to that, all the American movies are sure hits, so the interest in movies this summer is higher than normal. Among the films in release, the Toei summer features are focused on children, and grown-ups are sure to be dragged there as chaperones. Neon Genesis Evangelion, as you already know, is a film targeted towards anime fans in their high teens and early 20s. Such films lack general appeal. But when it comes to a Miyazaki feature, normal grown-ups, anime fans, and children can all be expected in the audience. I love that it's got normal in air quotes. Literally normies. Fucking normies. I think that's because there's an absolute belief built up through his work: Nazca of the Valley of the Wind, Laputa Castle in the Sky, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, Porco Rosso, and Omoi de Poro Poro, which Miyazaki did not direct. That is Isao Takahata. That one can count on finding his films entertaining. And during the month prior to the film's release, the past Miyazaki features, starting with Nazca, were shown on TV. 2 making-of documentaries were aired. Anticipation for the film was forced down everyone's throat. Now, this hit movie, Mononoke Hime, is bringing up a lot of debate. It has a very different worldview and drama from Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service, which seems to have confused many in the audience. Some say that its content about destruction of nature and its revenge, and the combative development resembles Nazca. Some even say it's a remake of Nazca. But there also seems to be frustration that the film ends without a fundamental resolution. Many seem to have the impression that Miyazaki developed the story all he wanted and then just assembled the workable elements into the ending. For a film that's such a big hit, that would be the target of such discussion should go without saying. The general audience and the media tend to say that they enjoyed this film, while anime fans, especially the older ones, don't seem to like it. They seem to think they have nowhere to stand unless they make unfavorable remarks, although that may be because they're being asked to comment about it with the expectation of making remarks like that. My personal impression is just what I wrote last month. I don't see why it has so many unnecessary scenes of cruelty. Some say the film is a remake of Nazca, but I'd rebut that it's only so in theme. In terms of drama, Nazca has emotionally evocative scenes in many strategic places, but they are all excluded in Mononoke Hime. There's only a consistent mood of pessimism in the film. I think it's an insult against Nazca to compare Mononoke Hime to it. But this is only my impression, personal impression. Maybe a movie these days needs this much excess in order to make an impact. Wow! Wow, what a harsh review of Princess Mononoke. I just watched Princess Mononoke like 3 days ago. It's fucking phenomenal. It's a fantastic film. I would say the negativity of the worldview is kind of a big part of the point. It's sort of about it's sort of a cycle of violence movie. It's about like the trappedness of human beings constantly trying to expand and constantly trying to grow and better ourselves because we see elements of how we've been held down. But in order to do that, we have to take away from nature, and nature ain't happy about it, you know. And it's about this war between man and nature, sort of, that concludes with really nobody wins, because in the end everything will be reset by nature, which will always, you know, regrow itself in the end. Something like that. That's just my response to this review from 20 years ago that I'm reading right now. But no, Mononoke Hime is a fucking great movie, and of course it is now regarded as like the best Hayao Miyazaki film, but mostly by like I think it's really interesting that even then it was seen as this sort of combative between like normies and anime fans, which a lot of anime fans, including myself when I was younger, would say things like that Hayao Miyazaki's not really anime, that like what he's going for is so different that it doesn't really relate to why people like anime. As time's gone on, I completely disagree with that, though. Like, I think Miyazaki not only is great because he's just making the best anime, like, that's why he's so worthwhile. Like, he's doing what I think anime is trying to do. He's just doing it better than anybody else. In spite of the fact that his films do appeal to normies, I don't think he, by any stretch, is that, or is trying to grab that audience. I mean, most of his films are fucking weirdly paced, and, you know, they're high fantasy movies with, like, deep moral implications. They're not fucking popcorn blockbusters. It's just his reputation that gets people into the theater so much. The idea that it's a remake of Nazca, though, does interest me, because that was kind of how I felt watching the movie, is that whereas Nazca, the film version of Nazca, I think is undercut by the fact that it's trying to condense this incredibly huge manga story into a film. You know, I don't know I don't know if that story works as well in a short form film, whereas Mononoke Hime was clearly, like, planned to be a movie, so it tells a kind of similar story, but, like, in a way that makes sense as a film. Anyway, it's a fucking great movie. Shut up, guy from 20 years ago. Takashi Oshiguchi. Whoever you are. Probably somebody really important. Alright, here we've got, behind-the-scenes insights from Noboru Ishiguro, as described up here, as director of some of Japanese animation's most influential classics, Space Cruiser Yamato, Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, Megazone 2-3, and Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Noboru Ishiguro is one of the most respected creators working in the anime industry today, and teaches seminars in animation technique. In this installment, he remembers what it was like before anime studios were first deluged. I think it's really interesting seeing Megazone 2-3 listed amongst those other shows, because Megazone 2-3 is today a fairly obscure OVA that I don't think is nearly as popular as it was in the 90s, whereas Yamato, Macross, and Legend of Galactic Heroes are, of course, all still upheld as classics. This is too interesting for me to not just, like, outright read it, so we're gonna do that. The year was 1978, when the first anime boom in Japan flamed up with the feature Arrivederci Yamato, after the Space Cruiser Yamato TV show we'd made had raised so much smoke. It was the year Japanese society recognized the existence of anime, and also the year that Animage magazine was first published. As is destiny in the mass entertainment industry, a popular show has to come out with a sequel. We, the main staff of the movie, were asked to make a second TV series, Yamato 2. In 1974, the first Yamato saw miserable defeat with an average rating of 7%. By the way, that number sounds fucking huge by modern anime standards. We had to cut short production of that show. Yamato 2 should have been a triumphant return for us, and in fact, episode 1 had a 24% rating. If anybody doesn't know what these ratings mean, it's the percentage of TV viewership that was watching the show at the time. 24% means 1/4 of all people who had TV were watching this show in Japan. That's fucking nuts. It may sound like a classic success story, but I was depressed in that studio. In 1975, there were 21 animated TV shows. In 1976, 23 shows. In 1977, 29 shows. And in 1978, 25 shows. The numbers were always in the 20s. When we were making the first Yamato in 1974, there were only 17 shows. But in 1979, the number went up to 38 shows. The production count finally entered the 30s. The 30s! the 30s. How many shows came out this year? 200 something, probably. For reference, there were 43 animated shows in 1980. It went down to 33 shows in 1981. It further decreased to 27 shows in 1982. But in 1983, the number went up to a historical first of 44 shows. This was the result of the previous year's Super Dimensional Fortress Macross setting light to the next anime boom. This was no bragging matter. For the industry, it's a good thing for anime to become popular, and the number of animated TV shows to increase, but as a studio, such a thing torments us with a shortage of skilled animators. I'll go back to 1978. 1978, by the way, is also the year that Hayao Miyazaki wrote an article, which is in his book Starting Point, about how there was an overabundance of new shows coming out and it was ruining animation. So I read a passage of that in the latest episode of the Pub Crawl. I'll put a time-coded link in the description. Or maybe I'll just make it its own video. I don't know. By the time we started production of Yamato 2, many studios had already gotten ready to make their own shows for the next year. We could only find half the number of animators we needed, so what happened was that many staffers got a field promotion. Those who were in between animators until then got to draw key animation. Key animators got to become animation directors. Naturally, they weren't as skilled, but there was no other way if we wanted to meet the schedule. This was the same at other companies too, and the brunt of the labor shortage got framed out overseas, mainly to Korea. During the first Yamato, we had sent some finish-up work out to Korea, but I remember it as being a rather unusual event. I think 1978 was the year when Korean labor was integrated into Japanese anime production as part of the system. The already short number of animators got further stretched thin in order to produce a huge number of shows. It was like a balloon about to burst. During the production of the first Yamato, I almost never went home and clung on at the studio. But that was to do whatever it took to make the show a better thing. This time around, it was once again a series of all-nighters, but the effort had gone down to the level of how not to create a gap in the broadcast. There wasn't room to consider content anymore. I learned firsthand how an increased number of shows can ruin a studio. As divine punishment would have it, in the long run, viewers wouldn't support shows like that. They all failed, and in 4 years, the number would go back down to the 20s. But the percentage of skilled animators had steadily increased in the meantime, so this time around, we could manage quantities of 30 or more shows. But in my view, I think the average skill level of animators has been slowly going down. Now our industry is entering yet another unheard of situation. As an aftershock of Evangelion's popularity last year, the number of shows this fall is up to 58! I can only look at this figure in amazement. I have no idea who will be making these shows at whatever studio, but from my experience, the majority of these shows will be disappointing. Some of them might even create a gap in the broadcast. The big studios like Toei and Sunrise do not take on more than they can handle, so studios that used to do only subcontract work will be doing the production. If ratings are bad, there will be cancelled shows, and if budgets, and they're small for all shows right now, aren't delivered, it's not hard to foresee studios going out of business and animators not getting paid. As a reaction to that, next year around this time, the number of shows will probably have dramatically decreased. In fact, some predict there to be only 20-some shows next year. I get the dark feeling that the industry will be setting yet another foot into the ruins. Actually, our Artland studio was about to do production for a TV show too. It was a 90% done deal, but they couldn't find a sponsor, so the deal fell through. If not, ours could have been the 59th show. Currently, I'm counting our blessings, but then I am also thinking about the new projects to get started on when the number of shows decreases next year and the industry stabilizes. 1997, this article was written, about problems that started in 1978 that have truly reached an apex today. He was freaking out about 58 shows coming out in a year. Now 58 shows come out every season. There is too much anime. Hey, what do you know? An advertisement for the Inuyasha Manga. Did the Inuyasha manga start coming out stateside before the anime? I did not even know that. Alright, now we've got anime reviews, and the way they're handled in this magazine is pretty interesting, at least at the time. This would change massively in the magazine's future. But they've got a show, a little description of what it is, and then 4 different people give a super brief review called the Import Report. At the top it says, "Hi, I'm My Anime. You know what they say about opinions, everyone's got one, and ours aren't necessarily the last word on anything. Whether or not you agree with a particular reviewer, we thought you might like to know that we thought of what we thought of the following 4 videos." So first they reviewed Clamp Gakuen Tanteidan, or Clamp University Detectives Club. I didn't even know this was a thing. Hallelujah 2 Boy, Haunted Junction, and Hyper Police. Out of the 4 of these, Hyper Police is the only one I actually know and have seen any of. There's also these weird little boxes on the side margin that explain who each of the reviewers is. And one of these I find interesting. After bonding with Badsmaru, toying with Tamagotchi, poring over Pocket Monster, and clamoring for Clamp, Mark Simmons' cuteness immune system has been clobbered. His resistance to all things cute at a record low, he now finds himself wandering about in a daze, cooing rapturously. Keep him away from small animals, especially those of the electrical variety. Pocket Monster! Pocket Monster! Pocket Monster was just coming out in Japan, and it wasn't even Pokemon yet. Fuck! There's only like a few months of time that you could make reference to Pocket Monster in an American magazine and it not be Pokemon. Okay, now we've got another review section, the Best of the West, where we talk about, I guess that last section was just for stuff that was out in Japan that you could import. This is for stuff that's out in the US. And they've got this interesting tagging system where they've got all these little icons that let you know what's in the show. You've got Courtesy Breasts, brought to you by our favorite animators. Note, anything with an appearance by Lupin the Third's Fujiko or animated by Super Otaku Production Studio Gainax gets an automatic mention. You got ESP, Evil Overlord, Idol Singers, Kung Fu Fightin', Masterpiece Theater, Mondo Mecha, Naughty Tentacles, Not of This World, Super Science, Ultra Violence, Romantic Hijinks, and Bad Words. These are the different things that they're tagging the stuff with. Here's a review for Ogenki Clinic. In its press release, Kitty Media describes Ogenki Clinic as a classic in the adult anime video genre which helped to start the hentai craze. Great, now we know who to blame. Hentai, for those who don't know, is the embarrassing brother-in-law of anime. While we enthusiastically embrace each Neon Genesis Evangelion release or sing the praises of Rumiko Takahashi's work, we try to forget the shockingly explicit horror and sex videos that have slithered into the American market. When we are reminded of these tapes, it's usually through uninformed newspaper exposés that paint hentai as the offensive end-all and be-all of Japanese animation. We're then forced to defend our hobby, pointing out that there's more to anime than La Blue Girl, Urotsuki Doji Legend of the Overfiend, or Demon Beast Invasion. In the end, we fail to completely cleanse the stink of hentai from our hobby. This pretentious fucking shit. Remember when I was just reading you last week, fucking goddamn protoculture addicts literally favorably reviewing hentai in their magazine. May I also turn back time to the highest selling anime in the US at the time, Twin Angels and Urotsuki Doji 3. Like, you can't pretend this wasn't a huge part of what it fucking was at the time. But you know how these people are. Look, I understand. Some people, you know, they really care about other people seeing them as not perverts and stuff, you know? Like, you don't want people to look at you and the fact that you're into anime and make assumptions about you being a huge pervert. But you don't have to throw the huge perverts under the bus to do that. You don't have to, you can just say there's more, like what Protoculture Addicts did, and say there's more to anime than just hentai. But, you know, here's some hentai reviews. Like, you don't gotta pretend Like, we're all disgusted. Like, we're all, this trashy hentai is ruining our reputation. Get the fuck out of here. And they can get away with that because of the fact that that's gonna sell anyways. Like, they're not gonna get in trouble with the people who released that by insulting it, you know. It's gonna sell anyways because it's fucking porn. Alright, there's a mailbag section back here. I like this guy's point. A letter published in your Volume 5, Number 3 letter section requests resources on drawing in the anime style. I've seen this particular subject come up in numerous letters in many magazines. The point is, there is no way to draw anime. That's like asking how to draw animation. Anime or manga is a broad generalization that includes all styles of art which share certain characteristics with each other. It is possible to draw like Rumiko Takahashi, or Katsuhiro Otomo, or Masamune Shiro, because they each have their own flair or twist on the central style. Just as someone does not draw American, but like Rob Liefeld, Neil Adams, or Frank Miller. The ultimate objective of learning to draw by example and instruction is to develop a signature style all your own. Thank you for that, Mitch Durnell. I guess at the time of this magazine coming out, Sailor Moon had just suddenly had its broadcast canceled or something, and people are freaking out about it. Here's a relevant conversation today. Dear Annie Messages, I'm a fan of Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball, and various other anime shows/movies. I love how it turned out the only 2 issues of Animerica I bought had details on Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z. But it not only shocks me, but pains me to see that you don't review some of the best damned anime from the 80s that has just returned to the airwaves. Yes, Thundercats and Voltron, both of which have been dead since the mid-80s and have now returned from beyond that hole, which covers all good, hard-to-find Japanimation. You don't even mention their revival in your TV update section. Please tell me you just forgot to share with the public their great return upon Cartoon Network at 4 p.m. EST for Thundercats and 4:45 p.m. EST for Voltron. Anyways. We've added Voltron to our charts as soon as it was brought to our attention, but Thundercats is a stickier matter. For our purposes, we usually take anime to mean shows that were originally designed for broadcast in Japan, not simply anything that was animated there. Though Thundercats is definitely a Japanese animated show, boasting the early work of Tenchi Muyo's Hiroki Hayashi no less, we'd call it more of a show designed for American broadcast, and thus not what we normally define as anime. Of course, in Japan, Disney features are also known as anime. What say you, readers? Does anime include any show that are animated in Japan? Even G.I. Joe and Spider-Man, both done, if we remember correctly, at Tokyo Movie Shinsha, home of Rayearth? Or is there a different yardstick by which to measure what makes a production anime? I don't have the answer to these questions. This guy, I'm a little curious how you could print that nasty letter talking about my anime from those pinheads in Southern Maryland. They need to get a life and stop, in parentheses, New York phrase, player hating, cool people. Yes, player hating was a New York phrase in 1997. Not caught on in the rest of the world, I guess. The fan art section, unsurprisingly, is like exclusively Ranma, Sailor Moon, and Dragon Ball Z. You can tell the era that we're getting into here. And here's a huge ADV advertisement for Ava and Devil Hunter Yoko and all their other stuff. I wonder why Ava's not made a huge deal of in Animerica. Maybe because it's a Viz magazine and ADV was the one making releasing Ava here. Just, you know, it's possible. Oh, hey, you can get a subscription to Pulp, the manga magazine, manga compilation magazine. Anyway, that's about it. That's the end. There's a huge manga entertainment ad on the back here. That's it for this issue of Animerica. Let me know what era of anime magazine you'd like me to cover next. I've got magazines from all over the place. If you want me to just keep going through the 90s into the 2000s, or if you think I should just skip around because you're sick of hearing about Leiji Matsumoto and Ranma, let me know, and I'll see you next time.